The Afghan sun hung heavy over Camp Bastion, its relentless glare turning the sand into a shimmering mirage. Inside the makeshift briefing tent, the air was thick with tension and the faint smell of sweat and diesel. Sergeant Daniel Carter stood at attention, his fingers tapping restlessly against his thigh as the commanding officer, Major Richard Hayes, unrolled a map across the wooden table. "Listen up," Hayes said, his voice sharp and clipped. "Intel suggests the Taliban have been using this village Al-Nasir as a staging ground. It's been abandoned for months, but locals claim they've seen movement at night." He jabbed a finger at a circled point on the map. "We're sending your platoon in to sweep and secure the area." A murmur rippled through the soldiers. Carter exchanged a glance with Corporal Liam O'Connor, who leaned in slightly. "Al-Nasir?" O'Connor muttered under his breath. "That's the place the A&A blokes were whispering about. Said it's cursed." Carter scoffed, but unease prickled at the back of his neck. He'd heard the rumors. Stories of men vanishing in the village's narrow alleys, whispers of shadows that moved on their own. Superstitious nonsense, he told himself. Still, the way the Afghan National Army soldiers had crossed themselves when the name came up had left an impression. Hayes ignored the murmurs. "You move out at 600. Standard recon, get in, sweep for weapons caches, and clear any hostiles. If it's empty, we'll mark it for demolition." He straightened, his gaze sweeping over the platoon. "Questions?" Private Jenkins, the youngest in the group, raised a hesitant hand. "Sir, the locals, they say the village is haunted, that no one who goes in comes out the same." A few of the men chuckled, but Hayes' expression darkened. "Stick to the mission, Private. Ghost stories won't keep you alive. Stay sharp, watch your corners, and trust your training." He dismissed them with a curt nod. As the soldiers filed out, Carter lingered, studying the map. The village was nestled in a valley, surrounded by jagged hills perfect for an ambush. O'Connor clapped him on the shoulder. "Don't tell me you're buying into that rubbish, Sarge." Carter shook his head. "No, but I don't like unknowns. And this place? It's one big bloody question mark." Outside, the desert wind howled, carrying with it the faintest echo of something that sounded almost like a whisper. Carter tightened his grip on his rifle. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. The pre-dawn chill clung to Carter's skin as the platoon moved out, their boots kicking up fine clouds of dust with each step. The desert stretched endlessly ahead, a barren expanse broken only by the occasional skeletal remains of long-dead trees. The sky was a dull, bruise-colored gray, the sun barely a suggestion on the horizon. Carter adjusted the strap of his rifle, the weight familiar against his shoulder. Behind him, the men moved in silence, their usual banter absent. Even O'Connor, usually quick with a joke, kept his mouth shut, his eyes scanning the rocky outcrops that dotted the landscape. The village of Al-Nasir loomed in the distance, its crumbling mud brick walls rising like jagged teeth from the earth. Carter squinted through his scope, but there was no movement, no flicker of shadows, no telltale glint of metal. Just an eerie stillness that set his nerves on edge. "Radio check," Carter murmured into his headset. Static hissed back at him, broken only by fragmented words. "Copy interference." Jenkins, walking point, glanced back, his brow furrowed. "Comms are shot, Sarge." Carter tapped his earpiece again. "Hayes, this is Alpha 1, do you read?" More static. Then, faintly, "Proceed caution." "Great," O'Connor muttered, shifting his grip on his rifle. "We're going in blind." The wind picked up, swirling dust into miniature cyclones that danced across their path. Carter wiped grit from his eyes and signaled the men to tighten formation. The village was close now. Close enough that he could make out the dark mouths of empty doorways, the skeletal frames of abandoned market stalls. Something noise made them freeze, a low, rhythmic thump, like something heavy being dragged across dirt. It came from somewhere inside the village. Jenkins swallowed audibly. What the hell is that? Carter raised a fist, halting the platoon. He strained to listen, but the sound had stopped as abruptly as it began. The silence that followed was worse. "Eyes open," Carter whispered. "Weapons hot." The men nodded, their faces tight with unease. As they stepped past the first crumbling wall of Al-Nasir, the air grew heavier, thick with the scent of old decay and something else. Something metallic, like rust or dried blood. His boots scuffed against an object half buried in the dirt. He bent down, brushing sand away to reveal a tarnished dog tag. The name etched into the metal was illegible, worn smooth by time. "Evening?" Jenkins asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Opana pocketed the tag without answering. Carter's radio crackled again, but this time, the voice that came through wasn't Hayes's. It was a whisper, thin and distorted, threading through the static like a needle. "Turn back." The platoon exchanged glances. No one spoke. Carter exhaled slowly, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. They kept moving. The village swallowed them whole. Crumbling walls leaned inward, as if whispering secrets to one another, their shadows stretching like grasping fingers across the empty streets. Carter's platoon moved in tight formation, rifles sweeping the hollow doorways and shattered windows. The only sound was the crunch of their boots on broken pottery and the occasional skitter of loose stones. Nothing human, nothing alive, yet the air itself felt wrong. It pressed against Carter's skin like a damp cloth, thick with the scent of old smoke and something sour, rotten meat, maybe, or spoiled grain. His pulse thudded in his ears, each beat a hammer strike of unease. O'Connor nudged him, jerking his chin toward a narrow alley. "Movement?" Carter followed his gaze. For a second, he thought he saw a flicker, a shadow detaching itself from the wall. But when he blinked, there was nothing, just dust motes swirling in the stale air. "I explain tricks," Carter muttered, though he didn't believe it. Jenkins, walking a few paces ahead, suddenly froze. "Sarge!" His voice was tight. "Look." A child doll lay in the middle of the street, its porcelain face cracked down the middle. One glass eye was missing, the other stared blankly at the sky. Its dress was faded, the fabric stiff with dirt, but the stitching was fresh. Too fresh for a village abandoned for months. O'Connor crouched, poking it with his barrel. "This wasn't here long." Carter's skin prickled. "Fan out. Check the buildings quietly." The men split into pairs, slipping into the nearest structures. Carter and O'Connor took a two-story house with a collapsed roof, its doorway sagging like a slack jaw. Inside, the darkness was suffocating. Carter flicked on his rifle's torch, the beam cutting through the gloom to reveal overturned furniture, a rusted kettle, a single sandal. Then, on the far wall, handprints, dozens of them, smeared in something dark and flaking. Not paint, not mud. O'Connor exhaled sharply. "Blood?" Carter didn't answer. His light traced the prints upward, where they vanished into the ceiling's shadows. A creak sounded overhead. Both men snapped their rifles toward the noise. Carter's finger hovered over the trigger, his breath shallow. The house held its breath with him. A whisper, not from the radio, not from O'Connor, from the ceiling. Voice, rasping and wet, murmured a single word in Pashto. "Buried." Jaw doesn't know though, Korka. O'Connor's grip tightened. Carter jerked his head toward the door. Move! They backed out, rifles trained on the ceiling until the last second. Outside, the others were already regrouping, their faces pale. Found a well, Jenkins said hoarsely. It's full. Carter didn't ask full of what. The look in Jenkins' eyes was answer enough. The radio crackled again. This time the voice was clearer. Leave? Carter turned and saw it. At the far end of the street, a figure stood silhouetted against the dying light. Tall. Too tall. Its limbs bent at angles that made Carter's stomach lurch. Then the wind shifted, and the figure was gone. O'Connor's hand clamped onto Carter's arm. We need to go, now. For once, Carter didn't argue. The platoon ran. Behind them, the village exhaled a sigh of dust and forgotten voices, and the doll's remaining eye rolled slowly in its socket, watching them flee. The platoon regrouped at the edge of Al-Nasir, their breaths ragged, their weapons still raised. The village crouched behind them like a sleeping beast, its streets now swallowed by the creeping shadows of dusk. Carter wiped sweat from his brow, his pulse still hammering. Report, he barked, scanning the men. Jenkins swallowed hard. The wallet was packed with bones, Sarge, human bones. A murmur rippled through the group. O'Connor spat into the dust. And that thing in the street, you all saw it, right? Or am I losing my goddamn mind? No one answered. Carter clenched his jaw. We stick to the mission. Sweep the rest of the village. Mark any weapons caches, then exfil. No more splitting up. The men exchanged uneasy glances but nodded. They moved in a tight formation, rifles sweeping every shadow, every gaping doorway. The next few houses yielded nothing but dust and decay. Abandoned meals still on plates, beds unmade, clothes folded neatly as if waiting for owners who would never return. It was the normalcy of it that unsettled Carter the most. Then, from a crumbling mosque at the village's center, a sound cut through the silence. Laughter, high and thin, like a child's but distorted, stretched too long. It echoed off the walls, skittering down the alleys until Carter couldn't tell where it was coming from. Jenkins's hands trembled on his rifle. What the hell is that? O'Connor's face had gone pale. Not a damn kid, that's for sure. Carter signaled for silence. The laughter faded, replaced by a new sound, a wet, rhythmic clicking, like teeth snapping together. It seemed to circle them, just beyond sight. Then, from the mosque's shattered minaret, a shadow moved. Too fast to track. A blur of limbs and tattered cloth. Carter's rifle snapped up. Contact! The men spun, barrels trained on the empty minaret. The laughter came again, this time from behind them. They whirled, but the street was empty. A rock clattered to the ground near Carter's boot. He looked up. Perched on a rooftop, a figure crouched. Its head tilted too far to one side, its grin splitting a face that was wrong to many teeth, eyes too wide. Then it moved. Not a leap. Not a fall. It flowed, liquid and boneless, down the wall and into the alley. Goal, Carter roared. The platoon didn't need telling twice. They ran, boots pounding the dirt, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. Behind them, the laughter rose, twisting into something guttural, something hungry. Carter risked a glance back. The street was empty, but the doll they'd seen earlier now sat upright in the dust, its cracked face turned toward them, and this time both eyes were missing. The platoon didn't stop running until the village was a smudge of shadows behind them. Carter signaled a halt at the base of a rocky outcrop, his lungs burning. The men doubled over, gasping, their rifles trembling in white-knuckled grips. O'Connor spat into the dirt, his face slick with sweat. What the hell was that? No one answered. The question hung in the air like the last note of a funeral dirge. Carter wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, forcing his breathing steady. We dig in here. Set a perimeter, double watch rotations. No one sleeps alone. Jenkins swallowed hard. You think it'll follow us? Carter didn't look back at the village. I think we don't take chances. The men moved quickly, their training overriding their fear. Trip flares were set at staggered intervals, claymores angled toward the darkening expanse between them and Al-Nasir. Carter checked each position himself, his fingers lingering on the detonator wires. The desert night was silent, the wind holding its breath. As the last sliver of sun vanished behind the hills, the temperature plummeted. Carter pulled his jacket tighter, watching his breath fog in the air. The men huddled in pairs, their murmurs low and tense. No one mentioned the laughter. No one mentioned the thing on the roof. O'Connor crouched beside Carter, passing him a canteen. You ever seen anything like that before? Carter took a swig, the water stale and warm. No. O'Connor exhaled, rubbing his face. Thought the ANA were just spinning ghost stories. But that... He cut himself off, shaking his head. Carter didn't reply. His eyes were fixed on the village. From this distance, Al-Nasir was just a cluster of jagged shapes against the indigo sky. Empty. Dead. Then, a flicker. Light. Carter stiffened. You see that? O'Connor followed his gaze. See what? There. Again. A faint, wavering glow in one of the upper windows of a half-collapsed house. Like a candle flame caught in a draft. Then another, and another. One by one, the windows of Al-Nasir lit up. Jenkins let out a strangled noise. They're empty. We cleared those buildings. Carter's grip tightened on his rifle. The lights pulsed, uneven, as if something moved in front of them. Shadows stretched across the walls, too tall, too thin. Then, as suddenly as they appeared, the lights winked out. The village plunged back into darkness. O'Connor's voice was barely a whisper. We need to call this in. Carter reached for his radio, static hissing in his ear before he even keyed the mic. Command, this is Alpha 1. Do you copy? No response. Just the empty crackle of dead air. Then, faint but unmistakable, a child's voice whispered through the noise. You shouldn't have come. The radio went silent. Carter lowered it slowly, his blood like ice in his veins. Around him, the men had gone still, their eyes wide. Somewhere in the dark, a rock clattered. Then another, closer this time. Carter raised his rifle. Stand ready. The laughter grew louder, spiraling around them like a living thing. It wasn't just from one direction anymore. It seemed to echo from the rocks, the dust, the very air itself. Carter's finger hovered over his rifle's trigger, his muscles coiled tight. Jenkins' breath came in short, panicked bursts. Sarge, where is it? Carter didn't answer. His eyes darted between the flickering shadows, the hair on the back of his neck standing on end. The desert night was too still, too quiet, save for that mocking laughter. Then, from the darkness beyond the trip flares, a shape darted fast, low to the ground. O'Connor's rifle snapped up. Contact! A flare hissed to life, casting the landscape in harsh red light. The thing froze at the edge of the illumination, a hunched skeletal figure with two long limbs, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. Its skin was stretched tight over bone, its mouth a jagged slash of broken teeth. And it was grinning. Jenkins fired first. The shots rang out, deafening in the silence. The creature twitched, its body jerking with each impact, but it didn't fall. It didn't even bleed. Then it laughed again, a wet, gurgling sound, and lunged. Carter barely had time to shout, "Fall back!" before the thing was among them. It moved like liquid, slipping between the men, its fingers clawing at their gear, their faces. A scream tore through the night as one of the privates went down, his weapon skidding into the dirt. O'Connor swung his rifle like a club, catching the thing across the ribs with a sickening crack. It reeled, then whipped its head toward him with a sound like snapping tendons. Carter emptied his magazine into its chest. This time it staggered. Black ichor oozed from the wounds, steaming in the cold air. The creature's grin never wavered as it turned toward him, its hollow eyes locking onto his. Then, from the darkness behind it, more shapes emerged. Dozens, hundreds. Some crawled on all fours, their spines arching like animals. Others dragged themselves forward on shattered limbs, all of them laughing. "Claymores!" Carter roared. O'Connor didn't hesitate. He slammed his palm onto the detonator. The night erupted in fire and shrapnel. The closest creatures disintegrated in the blast, their laughter turning to shrieks. The rest scattered, melting back into the shadows like smoke. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then the whispers began. Not from the darkness. From inside their heads. "You can't kill us. We've been here so long. We're so hungry." Jenkins clapped his hands over his ears, his voice breaking. "Make it stop." Carter grabbed him by the vest, hauling him upright. "We move. Now." The platoon didn't argue. They ran, stumbling over rocks, their boots kicking up clouds of dust. Behind them, the shadows moved, flowing like water, always just at the edge of their vision. Cornway's voice was raw. "We can't outrun them." Carter didn't look back. "We don't have to. We just have to last until sunrise." The laughter followed, threading between their ragged breaths, their pounding footsteps, and the whispers grew louder. "You'll never see the sun again." Dawn crept over the desert like a hesitant intruder, its pale light doing little to chase the chill from Carter's bones. The platoon had collapsed in a tight circle at the base of a rocky outcrop, their weapons still clutched in shaking hands. No one had slept. Carter rubbed his eyes, the grit of exhaustion making them burn. The whispers had stopped just before first light, fading like mist under the sun's touch. But the silence left behind was no comfort. O'Connor sat up with a groan, rolling his shoulders. "Bloody hell. I'd take Taliban ambushes any day than this." Jenkins didn't laugh. His face was drawn, his fingers tapping a nervous rhythm against his rifle. Did anyone else hear them? The voices? The men exchanged glances. No one answered. Carter stood, his joints protesting. "Check your gear. We need to..." He stopped. The sand at the edge of their makeshift camp was disturbed. Fresh footprints. They led away from the rocks, toward the distant smudge of Al-Nasir. The tracks were deep, uneven, as if whoever made them had been staggering, or dragging something. O'Connor cursed under his breath. "We didn't post a watch?" Carter's jaw tightened. "We did." He turned to the men. Who was on last rotation? Private Reynolds and Corporal Hale looked at each other, confusion etching their faces. "We were, Sarge," Reynolds said, "but we didn't see anyone move." Hale nodded, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Swear to God, no one left." Carter studied the footprints. They were too large to belong to any of his men, and the stride, too long. like something that wasn't quite human had made them. Jenkins swallowed hard. You think it's them? The things from the village? O'Connor kicked at the sand, erasing part of the trail. Doesn't matter. We're not sticking around to find out. Carter didn't argue. He keyed his radio again, static hissing in response. Command, this is Alpha 1, requesting immediate extraction. Over. Nothing. Then faintly, a voice, not Hayes, not even human, and a wet gurgling chuckle. Carter ripped the headset off, his stomach turning. Cortana met his gaze. We're walking out then. The men didn't need orders. They gathered their gear in silence, their movements quick, their eyes darting to the horizon. The footprints taunted them, a trail of breadcrumbs leading back to hell. As they moved out, Carter glanced back once. The footprints were already fading, swallowed by the shifting sand. But the village waited, and the whispers were louder now. The footprints led them toward a shallow depression in the earth, a bow-like scar in the desert floor, half hidden by wind-blown sand. Carter signaled the platoon to halt, his pulse hammering against his ribs. The tracks disappeared into the hollow, swallowed by the shadows pooling at its center. O'Connor crouched beside him, squinting. Could be a cave system. Taliban used to stash weapons in places like this. Jenkins shifted his weight, his rifle trembling slightly. Or it's where those things crawl out during the day. Carter ignored the comment, though the thought had already slithered through his own mind. He keyed his radio again, knowing it was useless before the static even hissed in his ear. No extraction, no reinforcements. We follow the trail, see if it leads to anything we can use. Weapons, comms, gear, anything. The men nodded, their faces grim. They moved in a staggered line, rifles sweeping the depression's edges. The air grew heavier as they descended, thick with the scent of damp earth and something metallic like old blood. Then Carter saw it. A crack in the earth, barely wide enough to fit a man. The footprints led straight to it. O'Connor exhaled sharply. Hell no! Jenkins leaned closer, his torch beam cutting into the darkness. The light didn't reach the bottom. It's not natural. Look at the edges. Carter saw it too. The stone was smooth, worn down by something other than wind or water, and there were marks, grooves carved into the rock, too precise to be erosion. Handholds, a ladder leading down. The realization settled over the platoon like a shroud. Someone or something had made this. A whisper curled from the depths, so faint Carter thought he'd imagined it. Then Jenkins' torch flickered, the beam dimming as if something had breathed on it. Not. O'Connor grabbed Carter's arm. We are not going down there. Carter didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the darkness below, because for a split second, he'd seen something move. A flicker of pale flesh, a hand too long, fingers splayed, brushing against the rock before vanishing into the abyss. The radio crackled to life. A voice, broken by static but unmistakably human, gasped a single word. Help. Carter's blood turned to ice. It wasn't one of his men, and it wasn't one of them. O'Connor's grip tightened. Carter knew he was right, but the voice came again, weaker this time. Please. Jenkins' face twisted. We can't just... A sound cut him off. From the crack in the earth, a wet, rhythmic clicking, or like teeth snapping together. Carter raised his rifle. The choice was already made. The depression wasn't just a hollow in the earth. It was a grave. Carter's stomach clenched as his boot sank into something soft beneath the sand. He looked down and saw the edge of a rib cage. its bones bleached white but still held together by scraps of sun-rotted fabric. A uniform. You know, Jenkins gagged, stumbling back. Jesus, Jesus. O'Connor swept his torch across the depression, the beam revealing more. Dozens more. Skeletons tangled together in a grotesque embrace, their skulls tilted at unnatural angles, their jaws gaping in silent screams. Some still wore helmets, the fabric of their uniforms clinging to brittle frames. Others were little more than scattered bones, half buried in the shifting sand. Carter's breath came short. The whispers from the radio, the voices in their heads, they weren't just echoes. They were warnings. The platoon stood frozen, their horror a living thing between them. Then the sand moved. A ripple, subtle at first, like a breath beneath the earth. Then another, and another. Jenkins' voice cracked. They're under us. O'Connor grabbed his collar, yanking him back as the ground beside them bulged upward. A skeletal hand burst from the earth, fingers twitching, grasping at empty air. Carter didn't think. He fired. The hand shattered, bone fragments sprang into the dust, but more were coming, dozens of them, erupting from the depression like obscene flowers. Skulls breached the surface next, their hollow eyes fixed on the living. The whispers returned, louder now, a chorus of dry, rustling voices. Join us. Stay. Feet. O'Connor emptied his magazine into the writhing mass, but the bones kept coming, reassembling themselves with a sound like cracking ice. Move! He roared. The platoon didn't need telling twice. They scrambled up the slope, their boots slipping on loose sand and crumbling bone. Behind them, the earth heaved, the skeletons pulling themselves free with jerky puppet-like movements. Carter risked a glance back. The depression was alive. Bones clicked together, forming grotesque parodies of human shapes. Spines too long, limbs too many, skulls fused at odd angles. They lurched forward, their movements erratic but fast. Jenkins screamed as one caught his ankle, its fingers like iron. Carter spun and fired, point blank, shattering its skull. The grip loosened and Jenkins wrenched free, his face slick with sweat. Keep moving, Carter barked. The platoon ran, their breaths ragged, their shadows stretching long in the dawn light. The village loomed ahead, its broken walls suddenly a lesser evil. Then the radio crackled again. The voice from before, weak, desperate. They're coming. Carter didn't stop. Behind them, the laughter began anew. The platoon didn't stop running until they reached the ruins of an old watchtower on the outskirts of Al-Nasir. Its crumbling walls offered meager cover, but it was better than nothing. Carter leaned against the sun-baked stone, his chest heaving, sweat stinging his eyes. Around him, the men collapsed, their faces hollow with exhaustion and fear. Private Reynolds was the first to break the silence. His hand shook as he fumbled for a cigarette. The hell were those things? No one answered. O'Connor spat into the dust, his jaw tight. Doesn't matter. We need to get out of this godforsaken place before nightfall. Jenkins let out a shaky laugh. You think daylight stops them? Did you see those bones move? Carter wiped his mouth, forcing his breathing steady. He'd seen things in the war, bodies torn apart by IEDs, men broken by firefights, but this was something else, something wrong. Then Corporal Hale spoke, his voice low. The ANA. They told me stories about this place. The men turned. Hale was the quietest among them, the one who'd spent the most time with the Afghan National Army soldiers during their deployment. He rarely spoke, unless it mattered. Carter nodded at him. What kind of stories? Hale swallowed hard, his fingers tracing the edge of his rifle like a talisman. They said Al-Nasir wasn't just abandoned, it was advanced Taliban. Rolled through months ago, executed every man, woman, and child who wouldn't swear allegiance. Threw the bodies in the well, left them to rot. O'Connor scoffed. We've seen massacres before. Dead don't crawl out of the ground. Hale's gaze flickered to the village. They do if they're not just dead. A chill crept down Carter's spine. Explain. Hale took a deep breath. The interpreter Rahim said the villagers cursed the Taliban as they died. Swore their souls would never rest until the ones who killed them paid in blood. And when the Taliban came back to torch the houses, he hesitated. None of them left alive. Jenkins' voice was barely a whisper. You're saying this place is haunted? Hale didn't answer. He didn't need to. O'Connor barked a laugh, but there was no humor in it. Ghosts don't leave footprints. Ghosts don't laugh. Carter stared at the village. The sun hung high now, bleaching the ruins of Al-Nasir into a stark, lifeless tableau. But he could still feel it, the weight of eyes on his back, the whisper of something moving just out of sight. Doesn't matter what they are, he said finally. They're real, and they're hunting us. The men fell silent. Then, from the watchtower's shadowed doorway, a voice rasped. You should have listened. The platoon spun, rifle snapping up. A figure stood in the darkness. Too thin, too pale. Its sunken eyes glinting with something that wasn't quite human. Rahim, the interpreter, or what was left of him. His uniform hung in tatters, his skin stretched tight over bone. His lips peeled back in a grin, revealing blackened teeth. Now, he whispered, you'll join them. Carter's finger tightened on the trigger, but before he could fire, he melted into the shadows, his laughter echoing long after he was gone. The radio crackled to life. Hayes' voice, frantic. Alpha 1 extraction point is 2 clicks east. Move now. They're coming. Carter didn't hesitate. We run. Hayes' voice cut through the radio static like a lifeline. Repeat extraction point is 2 clicks east. Immediate withdrawal. Do you copy? Carter's grip tightened on the radio. Copy, command. En route. He turned to the men, their faces gaunt with exhaustion, but alight with sudden hope. Move out. Double time. The platoon didn't waste a second. They fell into formation, rifles at the ready, their boots kicking up dust as they sprinted east. The desert stretched endlessly ahead, the horizon shimmering under the midday sun. Behind them, Al-Nasir crouched like a scar. Its crumbling walls whispering of horrors better left buried. O'Connor matched Carter's pace, his breath ragged. You think Hayes knows what's out here? Carter didn't answer. The radio had been dead for hours until now, until they'd seen Rahim. The timing was too perfect. Jenkins stumbled, his boot catching on a rock. He caught himself, but not before his canteen slipped from his belt and hit the ground with a hollow clank. He hesitated, glancing back. Leave it, Carter snapped. Jenkins swallowed but nodded, falling back into step. Then the radio hissed again. Not Hayes this time. A child's voice, sing-song and dripping with malice. Too late. Carter's blood turned to ice. The ground beneath them trembled, a faint, shuddering vibration, like the earth itself was waking. The men slowed, their rifles sweeping the barren landscape. Nothing. No movement, no shadows. Just the sun, the sand, and the silence. Klein wiped sweat from his brow. Keep moving. They ran. The extraction point was close now, a rocky plateau just visible in the distance. Carter's lungs burned, his muscles screaming, but he pushed harder. Then the wind shifted, and the laughter began. Not from behind them, from ahead. Carter skidded to a halt, his stomach lurching. The plateau wasn't empty. Figures stood silhouetted against the sky, dozens of them, their limbs too long, their heads tilted at unnatural angles. Waiting. Jenkins made a choked noise. "They're hurting us," O'Connor cursed, spinning to scan the desert. The platoon was trapped, the creatures ahead, the village behind, and no cover in between. Carter's mind raced. They couldn't fight, not against those numbers, but standing still meant death. Hayes' voice crackled through the radio one last time, frantic. "Alpha 1, fall back, do not approach the..." The transmission cut off. Static. Then, softly, the sound of something breathing. Carter ripped the headset off. The decision was made before he spoke. "We go through them." The men stared at him. O'Connor's jaw tightened. "That's suicide." Carter chambered around, his voice low. "Only other option is dying tired." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Jenkins nodded, his grip steadying on his rifle. "Let's make them bleed." The platoon formed up, their faces set, their weapons raised. The creatures on the plateau shifted, their laughter rising to a fever pitch. Carter took a breath and charged. The desert erupted in gunfire and screams, and the shadows moved. The gunfire died as quickly as it had begun. Carter's ears rang in the sudden silence, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The plateau was empty now. No figures, no laughter, just the wind whistling through the rocks like a taunt. Jenkins lowered his rifle, his hand shaking. "Where the hell did they go?" O'Connor spat onto the sand, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Playing with us." The platoon stood in a tight circle, their backs pressed together, rifles trained outward. The sun dipped lower, stretching their shadows long and thin across the desert. Carter's skin prickled. They weren't alone. Then, from the deepening twilight, the laughter began again, closer this time, and this time it wasn't alone. Whispers threaded through the sound, low and guttural, words in Pashto Carter couldn't understand, but didn't need to. The tone was clear, hunger, amusement, promise. Jenkins' voice cracked. "Sarge." Carter didn't let him finish. "There." He pointed to a half-collapsed compound 50 meters ahead, its walls pockmarked with bullet holes, but still standing. "We fortify. Now." The men moved as one, their boots kicking up dust as they sprinted for cover. The laughter swelled behind them, skittering over the rocks like living things. Carter didn't look back. He didn't need to. He could feel them, the weight of their attention, the anticipation in the air. The compound's gate hung askew on broken hinges. O'Connor shouldered it open, the rusted metal screeching in protest. Inside, the courtyard was littered with debris, shattered furniture, empty ammunition crates, the skeletal remains of a dog. No bodies. Carter didn't dwell on why. "Barricade the entrances," he ordered, his voice sharp. "Windows, too. Anything they can crawl through." The men worked fast, overturning tables, stacking sandbags, wedging broken chairs against door frames. Jenkins and Hale dragged a heavy wooden cabinet in front of the main gate, their muscles straining. O'Connor crouched beside Carter, his breathing steady but his eyes tight with tension. "This won't hold them." Carter checked his magazine, half empty. "Doesn't need to, just until sunrise." Outside, the whispers grew louder. The words were clearer now, snippets slipping through the cracks in the walls. "Open the door. Let us in. We're so cold." Jenkins flinched as something scratched against the compound's outer wall. Long, deliberate strokes, like fingernails on wood. Oran's jaw clenched. "Ignore it." The scratching intensified, moving around the perimeter, testing for weakness. Then, at the boarded-up window near the back, a tap. Then another. A rhythm. A knock. Carter's grip tightened on his rifle. The sound was familiar. Too familiar. The coded knock the platoon used to signal friendly approaching. Jenkins' face paled. That's our signal," O'Connor snarled. "It's not them." The knocking stopped. Silence. Then, from right outside the gate, a voice, mangled but unmistakably human, gasped, "Help me." Carter's blood ran cold. It sounded like Reynolds. Private Reynolds, who had been with them minutes ago, who was still with them, crouched beside Hale in the corner. The platoon froze, their eyes darting to Reynolds, then back to the gate. The voice came again, pleading, desperate. "Please, they're coming." Reynolds' hands trembled. "I'm right here." Outside, the laughter returned, louder now, drowning out the mimic's cries. The barricade trembled as something heavy thudded against it. Once, twice. Then the wood splintered. Carter raised his rifle. The night erupted in screams. The barricade exploded inward in a shower of splinters. Shadows surged through the gap, not the skeletal figures from the desert, but something worse. Twisted, half-formed things with too many limbs, their bodies stitched together from the remnants of the dead. Their laughter was a wet, guttural chorus, drowning out the platoon's shouts. Carter fired. The first creature's skull shattered. Black ichor sprang the wall behind it. It didn't stop. It kept coming, its broken jaw still stretched in a grin. O'Connor emptied his magazine into the horde, his voice raw. "Fall back, now!" The platoon retreated deeper into the compound, their boots slipping on blood-slicked tiles. Jenkins yanked open a rusted door to their left, revealing a narrow stairwell leading down. "Here, move!" They piled in, Carter slamming the door shut behind them. The wood shuddered as bodies threw themselves against it. Something scratched at the other side, nails dragging down the grain. The basement was pitch black, the air thick with the scent of mildew and old rot. Carter flicked on his rifle's torch, the beam cutting through the dark to reveal a low-ceilinged room lined with empty crates and rusted chains. A Taliban stash house, long abandoned. Hale collapsed against a crate, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "They're playing with us. They could have overrun us out there. Why hurt us here?" Reynolds wiped sweat from his face. "Maybe they like it. The chase. The fear." O'Connor reloaded with sharp, practiced motions. "Or, this place is a trap." The scratching at the door stopped. Silence. A giggle. High-pitched, childlike. It came from the far corner of the basement, where the torchlight didn't reach. Jenkins' breath hitched. No way. Carter swung his rifle toward the sound, the beam trembling slightly in his grip. The light carved a path through the darkness, illuminating a small figure crouched against the wall. A girl, no older than 8, her dress tattered, her dark hair matted with dust. She clutched a rag doll to her chest, its button eyes gleaming in the light. Her head tilted slowly, her lips peeling back in a smile too wide for her face. "You're late," she whispered. O'Connor's rifle didn't waver. "Don't dare to move." The girl giggled again, the sound echoing off the walls like a dozen voices layered together. Her fingers tightened around the doll, its fabric splitting with a wet rip. Something dark oozed from the tear. Not stuffing. Something dark oozed from the tear. Not stuffing. Fingers. Human fingers, curled and stiff, their nails blackened with rot. Jenkins gagged. The girl's smile stretched wider, her eyes glinting like polished stones. "They told me to save you a seat." Behind her, the shadows twisted, detaching from the wall like living things. Figures emerged, tall, emaciated, their faces stretched into grotesque masks of glee. The laughter swelled, filling the basement, the compound, the world. Carter's finger tightened on the trigger. The girl's head snapped toward him, her voice suddenly a guttural snarl. Too slow. The shadows lunged. The last thing Carter heard was Jenkins screaming. Then the laughter swallowed them whole. The laughter faded with the dawn. Carter blinked against the pale light filtering through the compound's shattered windows, his body aching as if he'd been trampled. Around him, the others stirred. O'Connor groaning as he rolled onto his side, Jenkins clutching his ribs, Hale spitting blood into the dust. They were alive. Somehow. Carter pushed himself up, his rifle still clenched in his fist. The basement was empty now. No girl, no shadows, no fingers spilling from torn cloth. Just the wreckage of their fight. Spent shell casings, splintered crates, blood smeared across the floor in ragged arcs. O'Connor coughed, wiping his mouth. "The hell was that?" No one answered. Carter's gaze swept the room, counting heads. Reynolds. Hale. Jenkins. O'Connor. His stomach dropped. "Where's Miller?" The men froze. Private James Miller, quiet, steady, the one who'd stayed at the back during the retreat, the one who'd been covering their six. Gone. O'Connor scrambled to his feet. He was right behind us when we fell back. Jenkins' voice cracked. No, he made it inside. I saw him. Carter didn't argue. He moved to the stairwell, his boots crunching over broken wood. The door at the top hung open, early morning light spilling through. The compound's courtyard was a graveyard of their last stand. Overturned furniture, bullet holes stippling the walls, dark stains in the dirt. No Miller, no body, no blood. Just his rifle, leaning against the gate like it had been placed there, and a single set of footprints leading away from the compound, back toward Al-Nasir. O'Connor cursed, kicking a crate. They took him. Hale's hand shook as he reloaded. Or he walked. The words hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. Carter knelt, examining the prints. Deep, deliberate, not the staggered steps of a man running for his life. The steady stride of someone who wanted to go. Jenkins made a choked noise. "We have to go after him." Carter didn't answer. His eyes traced the trail past the compound, across the open desert, disappearing into the village's jagged silhouette. The same path they'd fled hours ago. The radio crackled to life on his belt. Static. Then, faint but unmistakable Miller's voice, slurred as if half asleep. "I can hear them singing." The transmission cut off. Akana's face was stone. "That's not Miller." Carter knew he was right, but the alternative, leaving one of their own to whatever waited in Al-Nasir, was unthinkable. He straightened, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. We followed the trail. Jenkins exhaled in relief, but Hale's grip tightened on his weapon. "And if it's a trap?" Carter met his gaze. "Then we spring it." The men fell in behind him without another word. The desert stretched ahead, the rising sun painting the sand in shades of gold and rust. The footprints marched onward, unwavering, as if drawn by some invisible pull. As they neared the village outskirts, Carter spotted something glinting in the dirt. Miller's dog tags. They lay at the edge of a shallow pit, a mass grave, its edges disturbed, the sand freshly turned. Bones jutted from the earth, some still clad in scraps of NA uniforms. And at the center of the pit, the footprints stopped, as if Miller had simply stepped in and vanished. Jenkins swayed, his face gray. Oh God. Aaron grabbed his arm, steadying him. Look. A single handprint marked the pit's far edge, fingers splayed as if pushing up from below. Fresh, damp. Carter's breath caught. Then the sand shifted. Something beneath the surface stirred. The radio crackled again, Miller's voice now a wet, gurgling whisper. They're hungry, Sarge. The men stumbled back as the grave erupted, not with bones, not with shadows, but with hands. Dozens of them, bursting from the earth like obscene flowers, their fingers grasping, clutching, pulling. And from the depths, a chorus of voices rose, weaving into a single shuddering word. Join us. Carter didn't wait. Run. The platoon fled, the laughter of Al-Nasir chasing them all the way to the horizon. And beneath their boots, the earth breathed, waiting, hungry, alive. The sun was a merciless eye overhead, but its light brought no comfort now. Carter's platoon staggered across the desert, their movements sluggish, their faces hollow. Miller was gone. The grave had taken him. The knowledge sat like a stone in Carter's gut, heavy and cold. Jenkins muttered under his breath, his fingers twitching against his rifle. Did you hear that? O'Connor shot him a glare. Hear what? Jenkins' eyes darted to the empty expanse around them. My name. Someone just called me. Hale let out a shaky laugh. Cut the crap, Jenkins. No one said that. But Carter had heard it too. A whisper threading through the wind like a needle. Jenkins too soft a place, too clear to ignore. He clenched his jaw and kept walking. The radio on his belt crackled, static hissing like a living thing. Then, a voice not Miller's this time, not Hayes. A woman's voice, humming a lullaby in Pashto. The tune was familiar, one Carter had heard Afghan mothers sing to their children in the refugee camps. O'Connor ripped the radio from Carter's belt and hurled it into the sand. Enough of this! The humming didn't stop. It emanated from the dunes themselves, rising and falling with the wind. Reynolds pressed his hands over his ears, his breath coming in short, panicked bursts. Make it stop. Make it stop. Carter grabbed his shoulders, forcing him to meet his eyes. Focus. We keep moving. That's the only way out. Reynolds nodded, but his pupils were blown wide with terror. The whispers grew louder as they walked. O'Connor, Hale, Carter. Names, murmured in voices they almost recognized. Loved ones, fallen comrades, the villagers of Al-Nasir. The desert played tricks with sound, bending words until they seemed to come from every direction at once. Then Jenkins froze. His face went slack. His rifle slipped from his fingers, hitting the sand with a dull thud. O'Connor grabbed his arm. Jenkins? Hey. Jenkins didn't react. His gaze was fixed on something in the distance, something only he could see. A slow smile spread across his face. She's here, he whispered. Carter followed his stare. Nothing. Just heat shimmer and sand. Jenkins took a step forward, then another. toward the emptiness, toward the voice. Hale lunged, catching him by the vest. "Snap out of it!" Jenkins whirled, his fist connecting with Hale's jaw. The blow sent Hale sprawling, blood blooming at his split lip. Jenkins didn't seem to notice. His smile never wavered. As he turned back to the desert, "I have to go to her," he murmured. "She's calling me." Carter moved between him and the horizon, gripping his shoulders. "Listen to me. There's no one there." Jenkins' eyes flickered to his, suddenly lucid and terrified. "You don't hear her?" His voice broke. "Sarge, she's right there." Then his gaze shifted again, drawn back to the void. His body relaxed, his arms falling limp at his sides. "I'm coming," he whispered. And he ran. Carter shouted after him, but Jenkins didn't stop. He sprinted into the desert, his boots kicking up dust, his laughter ringing out high and wild and wrong. The platoon gave chase, but Jenkins was faster, fueled by something beyond exhaustion, beyond fear. Then, halfway up a dune, he vanished. 1 second he was there. The next, gone. No stumble, no fall. Just gone. The men skidded to a halt, their breath ragged. The desert stretched ahead, unbroken, undisturbed. No footprints. No sign he'd ever been there at all. Akana's voice was hollow. "What is happening to us?" Carter had no answer. The wind howled, carrying a new whisper, a chorus of voices now, speaking in unison. "You're next." And from the depths of the desert, Jenkins' laughter echoed back. Unhinged, delighted. The radio, half buried in the sand where O'Connor had thrown it, crackled to life one last time. Jenkins' voice, sing-song and dripping with malice. "You should have followed me." Then the static swallowed him whole, and the platoon was left with the terrible silence and the creeping certainty that the desert was listening. The platoon didn't speak as they trudged onward, their formation tighter now, shoulders nearly touching. The desert stretched endlessly, the horizon a jagged line of heat and haze. Carter's throat burned with thirst, but the thought of stopping, of letting the whispers catch up, was worse. Reynolds walked with his rifle clutched to his chest, his eyes darting to every shadow. "They're getting inside our heads," he muttered. "First Miller, now Jenkins." "Shut it," O'Connor snapped, though his own hands weren't steady. "We stick together. No more splitting up. No more listening." Hale wiped sweat from his brow, his gaze fixed on the ground. "And if they don't give us a choice?" No one answered. The wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of something sweet and rotting like overripe fruit left in the sun. Carter's stomach turned. The air here was wrong, thick with the weight of unseen eyes. Then the sand moved. A ripple, subtle at first, like a snake slithering beneath the surface. Then another, closer. Carter raised a fist, halting the group. "Hold position." The men froze, rifles trained on the shifting earth. The ripples circled them, slow and deliberate, carving a perfect ring in the sand, trapping them. Okana's breath hissed through his teeth. "They're hurting us again." Her whisper slithered from the ground. "Itself, come home, come home." The words vibrating through Carter's boots and up his spine. Then the sand in front of Reynolds bulged. Something pale breached the surface. A hand, skeletal and clutching, its fingers twitching toward his ankle. Reynolds screamed and fired. The shots tore through the hand, shredding bone and sinew, but the fingers kept moving, scrabbling at the air. More hands erupted around them, grasping, pulling, the sand boiling like water. "Run!" Carter roared. The platoon broke formation, sprinting through the gauntlet of grasping limbs. Hale stumbled as a hand closed around his boot, but O'Connor yanked him free, the bones snapping with a wet crack. They didn't stop until the hands faded behind them, the whispers dissolving into the wind. Carter bent double, his lungs on fire. The men collapsed around him, their faces gray with exhaustion and terror. Then Reynolds let out a broken laugh. "We're not making it out of here, are we?" Or lay down. O'Connor grabbed his vest, hauling him up. "The hell we're not." But Reynolds wasn't looking at him. His gaze was fixed on the distance, his pupils blown wide. No, you don't see it?" Carter followed his stare. The desert was empty, but Reynolds smiled, his voice dreamy. "The trees, the water, it's right there." Hale's face drained of color. Jenkins said the same thing before he... Reynolds shook free of O'Connor's grip. "I have to go." Carter stepped in front of him. "That's not real, Private." Reynolds' smile didn't waver. "It's more real than this." Then his body jerked, his head snapping towards something only he could hear. His lips moved, forming silent words. "Yes, yes, I'm coming," before he turned and ran. O'Connor lunged, but Reynolds was faster, his sprint fueled by madness or mercy. Carter couldn't tell. They chased him, shouting his name, but Reynolds never looked back. He crested a dune and vanished, just like Jenkins, just like Miller. O'Connor fell to his knees, his fists sinking into the sand. God damn it. The wind howled, the voices rising in a chorus of mockery. 3 left. 3 little soldiers. Who's next? Hale's hand shook as he reloaded. "We can't fight this, Sarge." Carter knew he was right. The desert wasn't just hunting them. It was unmaking them, one by one. He looked at the remaining men. O'Connor, rage and grief etched into every line of his face. Hale, his resolve crumbling with every lost comrade. And himself. How long before the whispers found him? Carter exhaled, tightening his grip on his rifle. "Then we don't fight. We outlast." The radio crackled at his belt, Reynolds' voice singing through the static. "You'll be with us soon." Carter ripped the battery from the device and hurled it into the desert. The sun dipped lower, staining the sand the color of blood, and the shadows grew longer and hungrier, waiting. The laughter wasn't distant anymore. It was inside the compound. Carter pressed his back against the barricaded door, his breath shallow, his pulse hammering in his throat. The last of the daylight had bled from the sky hours ago, leaving only the flickering glow of their torches to push back the dark. Outside, the desert wind howled, but beneath it, always beneath it, came the sound. That damned laughter, high and guttural, skittering through the cracks in the walls like insects. O'Connor crouched beside a shattered window, his rifle trained on the blackness beyond. His face was a mask of sweat and dirt, his knuckles white around the grip. "They're close." Hale didn't answer. He sat slumped against the far wall, his helmet tipped forward, his fingers tracing the stock of his weapon in a slow, absent rhythm. His lips moved silently, forming words Carter couldn't hear, or didn't want to. Carter shifted, his boots scraping against the blood-stained floor. The compound was a ruin, furniture overturned, walls pockmarked with bullet holes, the air thick with the stench of gunpowder and something fouler. They'd fought their way here after Reynolds vanished, driven by sheer instinct, the need for walls, for cover. But the walls wouldn't save them. Not from this. A scratch at the door, delicate, almost playful. Carter's finger twitched against his trigger. Scratching intensified, nails dragging down the wood in long, deliberate strokes. Then, a knock. 3 sharp raps. The platoon's old signal for friendly approaching. Arth's jaw clenched. "Don't dare to answer." Hale lifted his head, his eyes glassy. "It's Reynolds." "No." Carter's voice was a whip crack. "It's not." The knocking came again, louder this time. Then a voice, Reynolds' voice, but wrong, stretched too thin, the words bubbling as if spoken through water. "Let me in. I'm so cold." Hale lurched to his feet. O'Connor grabbed his arm. "Sit down." The door shuddered under a sudden impact, the barricade groaning. Dust sifted from the ceiling as something heavy threw itself against the wood again and again. Carter braced his shoulder against the door, his muscles screaming. "Hale, help me." Hale didn't move. His gaze was fixed on the window, his expression slack with awe. "She's here." O'Connor spun. "Who's—" Then he saw it. And he's in the window. Pale, beautiful, and rotting. The woman's lips curled into a smile, her hollow eyes locking onto Hale's. Her fingers tapped against the glass, the nails blackened and broken. "Come home," she whispered. Hale took a step forward. O'Connor tackled him, sending them both crashing to the floor. "Snap out of it!" The door splintered behind Carter, a jagged crack splitting the wood. Something pressed against the gap, long, skeletal fingers, their joints bending too many times. Carter emptied his magazine into the door. The fingers twitched, but didn't retreat. Hale writhed beneath O'Connor, his voice breaking. "You don't see her? She's right there." The woman at the window tilted her head, her smile widening until her cheeks split, peeling back to reveal rows of needle-thin teeth. O'Connor recoiled. "Jesus Christ!" Hale seized the moment. He twisted free, lunging for the window with a choked sob. Carter couldn't stop him. No one could. Hale's hands met the glass and passed through, as if it weren't there at all. The woman's fingers closed around his wrists and pulled. Hale's scream was cut short as he stretched, his body elongating like taffy, his flesh warping, his bones snapping. Then he was gone. The window was empty. The woman's laughter lingered, echoing in the sudden silence. O'Connor staggered back, his face ashen. The door exploded inward. Carter hit the ground hard, his vision swimming. Shadows poured through the breach, shapeless, writhing things, their forms flickering between human and something else. The torches guttered, the light dying as if smothered. O'Connor fired blindly, his shout swallowed by the rising tide of whispers. Only 2 left. So hungry. "Let us in." Carter scrambled to his feet, grabbing O'Connor's vest. "Move!" They fled deeper into the compound, the darkness chasing them, the laughter rising to a deafening crescendo. A hallway loomed ahead, its walls streaked with handprints, old and fresh, overlapping in a grotesque mosaic. The last door at the end stood slightly ajar. Carter didn't think. He shoved through, O'Connor on his heels, and slammed it shut behind them. The room was small, windowless, the air thick with dust. A single chair sat in the center, its wooden legs scarred with deep gouges. And on the chair, a doll, the same one from the village, its cracked face tilted toward them, its empty eye sockets weeping thick black tears. O'Connor's breath came in ragged gasps. "This isn't real. This can't be real." Carter didn't answer. His gaze was fixed on the doll's lap, where a radio sat, its speaker buzzing with static. Then, from the other side of the door, A sound froze the blood in his veins. Not laughter, not whispers. A voice he knew. Hayes. Alpha 1, do you copy? O'Connor's eyes widened. That's command. Carter grabbed his arm. It's not him. The knob turned. The doll's head lolled, its mouth stretching into a grin, and the radio hissed a final, shuddering truth. You were never getting out alive. The door creaked open, and the night swallowed them whole. The flickering lights intensified, casting grotesque shadows on the walls, elongated, writhing shapes that pulsed in time with the laughter. Carter's finger hovered over his rifle's trigger, but the room was empty. No, not empty. Alive. The walls breathed. O'Connor backed into him, his shoulder pressing against Carter's. They're everywhere. The radio on the doll's lap crackled, Hayes's voice twisting into something guttural. You shouldn't have come. Then the doll's head snapped up, its hollow eyes locking onto theirs. A scream tore through the compound, not from the radio, not from the shadows. From behind them, Private Reynolds' voice, raw with terror. They're inside us. Carter spun. The door was gone. The hallway stretched endlessly, its walls slick with something dark and glistening. At the far end, a figure staggered toward them. Reynolds, his uniform torn, his mouth stretched in a rictus grin. His eyes were black, pupils blown wide, veins spiderwebbing across his cheeks like cracks in porcelain. Starge. His voice was wrong, layered with whispers. You left me. Bilden raised his rifle. Stay back. Reynolds laughed, the sound wet and broken. Then his jaw unhinged, his throat bulging as something moved beneath his skin. His fingers clawed at his own chest, nails ripping fabric and flesh alike. Let me show you, he gurgled. His ribs split open, not from the outside, from within. A hand skeletal, dripping, thrust out from the cavity, fingers splaying in a grotesque wave. Then another, and another, dozens of them, pushing through muscle and bone, peeling Reynolds apart like wet paper. O'Connor fired. The bullets tore through Reynolds' collapsing body, but the hands caught them, blackened fingers plucking the rounds from the air like flies. The laughter swelled, the walls trembling, the ceiling raining dust. Carter grabbed O'Connor's vest. Run! They turned. And the doll stood in their path. Its cracked lips parted. Too late. The floor lurched, tilting violently. Carter's boots slipped in the sudden slickness underfoot. Not dust, not sand. Blood. O'Connor's scream was cut short as the shadows surged, wrapping around his legs like vines. They pulled, dragging him down into the floor as if it were liquid. His fingers scrabbled at the tiles, his nails breaking as he fought. Carter lunged, grabbing his wrists. The shadows were impossibly strong, their grip like iron. O'Connor's body stretched, his joints popping, his scream rising to a shriek. Then the radio hissed, the doll's voice singing through the static. One left. O'Connor's eyes met Carter's, wide with realization. With goodbye, he let go. The shadows swallowed him whole. Silence. Carter staggered back, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The hallway was gone. The doll was gone. He stood alone in the compound's courtyard, the moon a sickly yellow overhead. The air reeked of copper and decay, the sand underfoot littered with familiar shapes. Dog tags, dozens of them, glinting in the dim light. Names he knew, names he'd called in roll call. Miller, Jenkins, Hale, Reynolds, O'Connor. The wind whispered through the ruins, carrying voices, laughter, promises. A hand brushed his shoulder. Carter whirled, rifle raised, and stared into his own face. His reflection grinned back at him, its eyes black pits, its teeth needle-sharp. "You're the last," it murmured. "Don't you want to rest?" Carter pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed, the recoil jolting up his arm. But the reflection didn't flinch. It laughed, the sound peeling away layers of the night like skin. The compound dissolved, the desert unraveling into a void of writhing shadows and grasping hands. The radio crackled at his feet, the doll's voice a final shuddering sigh. "Welcome home." The hands closed around him, and the night ate him alive. Epilogue. The sand remembers. The sun rose over Al-Nasir, its light painting the ruins in shades of gold and rust. The wind stirred the sand, erasing footprints, burying shell casings, swallowing the last traces of the platoon that had vanished within its walls. In the village square, a doll sat upright in the dust, its cracked face tilted toward the sky. Its stitches had split. Its belly was full. And in the silence between the gusts, if one listened closely, the desert laughed. Dawn bled across the desert like a wound, staining the sand in hues of rust and gold. Carter staggered forward, his boots dragging through the dust, his body numb with exhaustion. The village of Al-Nasir loomed behind them, its shattered walls now silent, its streets empty. But the laughter still echoed in his skull. O'Connor was gone. Hale, Reynolds, Jenkins, Miller. All of them swallowed by the desert, by the shadows, by the things that wore their voices like ill-fitting skins. Only Carter remained, and the whisperers. "You're the last," they murmured, threading through the wind like serpents. "The sand remembers. The sand always remembers." His radio was dead. His canteen was empty. His rifle had one round left. He knew what it was for. The extraction point was a speck on the horizon, a smudge of unnatural color against the endless beige. A helo waited there, or was supposed to. Carter no longer trusted his eyes. The desert lied. It showed you what you wanted to see, then ripped it away. A shape moved at the edge of his vision. Carter didn't turn. He knew better now. "Almost there," the thing that wasn't O'Connor crooned, its voice a perfect mimic. "Just a little farther, Sarge." Carter's finger brushed the trigger. The extraction point grew closer. The helo was real, or seemed to be. Its rotors were still, its hatch open. No crew in sight. The whispers surged, a chorus of voices he knew too well. "Don't get on that bird, Carter. It's not safe." Nothing safe. He kept walking. The sun climbed higher, its heat a physical weight. His vision swam. The helo flickered there, then gone, then back again. A mirage? A trick? Or a final test? The laughter rose behind him, skittering across the dunes. He didn't look back. He already knew what he'd see, the platoon, his men, standing at the village's edge. Grinning. "Come home," they called. Carter spat blood into the sand and kept moving. The helo was real, it had to be. He reached the landing zone. The hatch yawned before him, the interior dark. No pilot, no crew. Just silence. And a single doll, seated in the cargo bay, its button eyes gleaming. Carter raised his rifle. The doll's head tilted. "Last round's yours," it whispered in Hayes' voice. "You know how this ends." Carter's finger tightened on the trigger. Then the rotors roared to life. The world snapped into focus, the crew shouting, hands grabbing his vest, hauling him inside. The hatch slammed shut. The desert fell away. Al-Nasir shrank below, its ruins crumbling into the earth as if they'd never been. The crew chief leaned close, his mouth moving, but Carter couldn't hear him over the ringing in his ears. Or the laughter. Ain't now, but still there, still his. Carter closed his eyes, and the doll's voice curled through the noise, a secret just for him. See you soon. The helo banked east toward the sun, and the desert watched it go, waiting, hungry, live. The fluorescent lights of the debriefing room buzzed like insects in Carter's skull. He sat rigid in the metal chair, his hands folded on the table, his knuckles still scabbed from the desert. The air smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee, a world away from the rot and heat of Al-Nasir. Across from him, Major Hayes flipped through a file, his expression unreadable. A medic had already checked Carter for injuries, superficial cuts, dehydration, nothing to explain the hollow look in his eyes. Hayes closed the file with a snap. You're the only one who made it out. It wasn't a question. Carter's throat burned. Yes, sir. Hayes leaned forward, his voice dropping. Tell me what happened out there. The words lodged in Carter's chest like shrapnel. How could he explain the laughter? The hands in the sand? The way his men had vanished, one by one, swallowed by something that wore their faces? He opened his mouth, closed it. Something. Tried again. We were ambushed, he said finally, the lie ash on his tongue. Taliban fighters, they picked us off. I don't know how I got away. Hayes' eyes narrowed. Your radio logs show no contact, no distress calls. Carter's fingers twitched. Because the desert ate them. Comms were down. Hayes exhaled through his nose, flipping open the file again. The helo crew said you were alone when they found you. No signs of hostiles, no bodies. No bodies. Carter almost laughed. Of course there weren't. The desert kept what it took. Hayes tapped a photo on the table, a grainy aerial shot of Al-Nasir, its streets empty, its well gaping like a wound. We swept the village. No weapons caches, no Taliban, just dust. Carter stared at the image. The doll wasn't in the frame, but he knew it was there, watching, waiting. Hayes leaned back, his chair creaking. The medics say you're suffering from exhaustion, combat stress. It happens. A dismissal, a blessing. Carter should have been relieved. Instead, his skin crawled. Hayes stood, gathering the file. Get some rest, Sergeant. You're off rotation for 2 weeks. Carter didn't move. Sir, the others, their families. We'll handle the notifications. Hayes' voice was firm, final. It's over. It's never over. The door clicked shut behind Hayes, leaving Carter alone with the hum of the lights and the whispers only he could hear. You told, they murmured, slithering from the corners of the room. But we don't mind. Carter's hands shook. On the table, the photo of Al-Nasir stared back at him, and in the grainy shadows of the well, something pale shifted. Waving, Carter flipped the photo face down. The whisperers laughed, and the lights flickered. Just once. Just enough. The nightmares always started with laughter. Carter jolted awake, his sheets soaked through with sweat, his throat raw from screaming. The digital clock on his nightstand read 3:17 IEM, the same time he'd woken every night since returning from Al-Nasir. The same time the whispers grew loudest. He staggered to the bathroom, flicking on the light with trembling fingers. The mirror reflected a stranger, sunken eyes, hollowed cheeks. A jagged scar along his jaw where no wound had been before. "You're still ours," the reflection mouthed, its lips moving a second too late. Carter slammed his fist into the glass. It didn't shatter. It rippled like water, and beneath the surface, hands pressed against the other side, their fingers straining toward him. He stumbled back, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The laughter followed, skittering across the tiles, threading through the drip of the faucet. "Miss us? Not a dream. Never just a dream." He fled to the kitchen, his hands fumbling for the bottle of whiskey on the counter. The first burn of alcohol was a relief, a momentary distraction from the thing coiled in his chest. The knowledge that he hadn't really escaped. Al-Nasir was still with him. It was hungry. The phone rang. Carter froze, the bottle halfway to his lips. No one called at this hour. No one called at all. Not since Hayes had quietly reassigned him to a desk job. Not since the other soldiers started crossing themselves when he walked by. The ringing continued, insistent. He picked up. Static. And Sarge. Jenkins' voice, young, terrified. Carter's grip tightened. "You're dead." A wet chuckle. "Yeah, but the sand remembers." The line went dead. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Carter didn't need to look to know what he'd see. The doll from the village, perched on his porch swing, its button eyes gleaming in the dark. It had followed him home, and it wasn't alone. He reached for his sidearm, the one he'd smuggled out of the armory, the one he kept loaded with a single round, just as the laughter swelled, pouring in through the cracks under the doors, the vents, the spaces between the walls. "Let us in," they whispered. Carter pressed the barrel to his temple. His finger trembled on the trigger. The clock ticked over to 3:18, and the doll on the porch smiled. Waiting. Always waiting. The whiskey bottle slipped from Carter's fingers, shattering on the kitchen floor. The sharp scent of alcohol filled the air, mixing with the metallic tang of his own sweat. The laughter in the walls grew louder, more insistent, layered voices overlapping, some pleading, others mocking. "You don't have to be alone. We miss you, Sarge." Pull the trigger. It's easier. Carter's hand shook, the cold steel of the pistol pressing harder against his temple. His reflection in the broken glass shards at his feet stared back at him, fractured and distorted. Then, a knock at the door. 3 sharp raps. The platoon's signal. Carter's breath hitched. The knocking came again, harder this time. "Let us in," O'Connor's voice called from the other side. "We brought the whole squad." Carter's finger twitched on the trigger. He knew what waited beyond that door. Not his men, not really. Just the desert wearing their faces, the same way it had in Al-Nasir. The knob rattled. The wood groaned. Something scratched at the frame. Long, deliberate strokes, like fingernails on bone. The whispers inside the house swelled to a crescendo, wrapping around him, pulling at his resolve. "You left us there," Jenkins sobbed through the walls. "You let us die," Hale hissed from the shadows beneath the cabinets. "Now it's your turn," Reynolds giggled from the static of the TV screen. Carter's vision blurred. The room tilted. The doll's voice cut through the noise, sweet and sing-song. "1 round left, Sergeant. Don't you want to rest?" The door burst open. Wind howled through the house, carrying with it the scent of hot sand and rotting meat. The hallway beyond was no longer his own. It stretched endlessly, the walls bleeding into the ruins of Al-Nasir, the floor littered with dog tags and shattered bones. Figures stood in the doorway. These men, their uniforms torn, their faces slack, their eyes black pits, reflecting a hunger that had no end. O'Connor stepped forward, his jaw unhinging like a snake's. "Welcome home," he rasped. Carter pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed. Silence. Then laughter. Not from the figures. From the pistol itself, its barrel still smoking, its grip vibrating in his hand like a living thing. The bullet hadn't fired. The round was still there, waiting. The doll's voice curled from the weapon, soft and intimate. "You can't kill what's already dead." The figures surged forward. Carter didn't scream. He let them take him. And as the darkness swallowed him whole, the last thing he heard was the desert sighing in satisfaction. And the clock, ticking over to 3:19. Epilogue, the sand remembers. The house stood empty. The whiskey pooled on the floor, soaking into the wood, the glass shards glittering like teeth in the early morning light. The pistol lay abandoned on the counter, its single round still chambered. And on the porch, the doll sat upright in the rocking chair, its stitches split, its belly full. The wind stirred the sand in the yard, erasing the footprints that had led to the door. And in the silence between the gusts, if one listened closely, the desert laughed. Years later, the declassified audio file crackled to life in the dimly lit government office. The technician adjusted his headphones, frowning as he isolated the faint background noise beneath Sergeant Carter's final transmission. "Command, this is Alpha 1, requesting immediate extraction. Over." Static hissed, the recording cutting in and out, standard interference for the region. But then, beneath the white noise, something else. The technician leaned forward, amplifying the signal. There, a whisper, no laughter. High, giddy, layered like a chorus of voices overlapping. Not human, not quite. He played it again, and again. Each pass made his skin prickle. The laughter wasn't just in the background. It was responding, rising and falling in time with Carter's panicked breaths, as if something had been standing right beside him, mimicking the cadence of his voice. The door to the office creaked open. His supervisor, a stern-faced woman with a security clearance higher than God, stepped inside. "Well?" she demanded. The technician swallowed. "You need to hear this." He hit play. Carter's voice filled the room, desperate. "They're not Taliban. They're something else. Do you copy? Something else." And beneath it, undeniable now. Equaling, childlike, malicious. The supervisor's face drained of color. The recording continued, Carter's words dissolving into static before cutting off abruptly. But the laughter lingered for 3 more seconds, clear as a bell. Then, a final whisper. "We're still here." The technician yanked off his headphones like they'd burned him. The supervisor stared at the screen, her voice barely audible. That village was wiped off the map. Nothing was left. A beat of silence. Then, from the hallway outside, a sound made them both freeze. A faint, wet clicking, like teeth snapping together. The recording hadn't stopped playing. The technician's hand shook as he reached for the delete key. The supervisor grabbed his wrist. "No, burn it. Burn all of it." Outside, the overhead lights flickered, and the laughter followed them all the way to the parking lot. The remaining soldiers sat in silence around the dim glow of a single lantern, their faces hollow, their hands shaking. The desert wind howled outside the reinforced walls of the safe house, but none of them flinched. Not anymore. Carter stared at the dog tags spread across the table: Miller's, Jenkins's, Hale's, Reynolds, O'Connor's. All that was left of them. All that could be left. Private Ellis, the youngest of the survivors, finally broke the silence. His voice was raw, as if he'd been screaming. "We can't tell them. No one would believe us." Corporal Shaw clenched his fists, his knuckles white. "And if whatever happened to the others follows us home?" A chill settled over the room. The lantern flickered, casting long, writhing shadows against the walls. Carter exhaled slowly, his fingers tracing the edge of O'Connor's tags. "We don't speak of it, not to command, not to the families, not to each other." His voice was steel. "We bury it. Deep." Ellis swallowed hard. "And if it doesn't stay buried?" The wind rattled the shutters. For a moment, the lantern's flame guttered, plunging them into near darkness. Shaw's whisper was barely audible. "Then we don't live long enough to regret it." Carter reached into his pack and pulled out a bottle of cheap whiskey, the last one they'd taken from the mess before extraction. He poured 3 shots, the liquid catching the dim light like old blood. "No records," he said, sliding a glass toward each man. "No reports, no drunk confessions. We take it to our graves." Ellis hesitated, then lifted his glass. "To the dead." Shaw's jaw tightened. "And to staying alive." Carter didn't toast. He downed the whiskey in one burning swallow, the alcohol doing nothing to chase the cold from his bones. Outside, the wind carried a sound faint, distant, but unmistakable. Laughter. The lantern flickered again, and for a heartbeat, the shadows on the walls stretched too long, too thin, too familiar. Carter stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Burn the tags." Shaw's head snapped up. "What?" "We burn them. Now." Carter's voice left no room for argument. "All of them." Ellis looked like he might protest, but Shaw was already moving, dumping the tags into the empty ammunition crate in the corner. Carter struck a match, the flame trembling in his grip. For a moment, he thought he heard O'Connor's voice, whispering from the dark. "You can't kill what's already dead." The match fell. The tags blackened, the metal warping, the names melting away into smoke and ash. The survivors watched in silence as the last traces of their platoon dissolved into nothing. But Carter knew better. The desert remembered, and the pack they'd made tonight wouldn't save them. It would only make the waiting worse. The lantern flickered one last time, and in the shadows, something grinned. The wind howls through the ruins of Al-Nasir, carrying grains of sand that whisper against the crumbling walls. The village is a skeleton now. Empty doorways yawn like broken jaws, the market square swallowed by dunes, the well filled to the brim with sun-bleached bones. The doll sits upright in the dust of the central square, its stitches split, its belly swollen. It does not rot. It does not decay. It waits. Footprints appear in the sand overnight, fresh, deep, leading to the well before vanishing at its edge. No one makes them. No one sees them made. The wind shifts, and for a moment, the air thrums with the memory of gunfire, of screams, of laughter that was never human. Shadows stretch too long in the midday sun, their shapes wavering between man and something else. At dusk, the windows of the abandoned houses flicker with light candles that were never lit, flames that do not burn. Figures move behind the glass, their silhouettes distorted, their heads tilting at impossible angles as they watch the horizon, waiting, hungry. The doll's button eyes gleam in the fading light. And in the silence between the gusts of wind, if one listens closely, the desert laughs. A new patrol is scheduled for next month. The orders are already signed. The village is ready. The wind never stops whispering in Alma's ear. It curls through the skeletal remains of the village like a living thing, carrying voices that shouldn't exist, fragments of radio static, the echo of gunfire, the wet click of teeth snapping together. The sand remembers. The sand always remembers. In a dimly lit archive room half a world away, a young analyst pores over the declassified files of Operation Sandpiper. The official report is sparse. Platoon presumed KIA. Enemy engagement unconfirmed. Area designated for drone strike. The words are sterile, impersonal. They say nothing of the laughter. The analyst pauses on Sergeant Carter's final psych eval before discharge. PTSD, hallucinations, self-harm ideation. Standard for men who've seen too much. But one line stands out, scribbled in the margins like an afterthought. Subject insists they're still in the sand. A chill prickles the analyst's neck. She pulls up the satellite footage of Al Nasser's bombing, the fireball, the collapsing buildings, the dust plume rising like a funeral shroud. Then she notices it, paused at the exact moment of detonation. The thermal imaging shows something the report never mentioned. Shapes in the ruins. Dozens of them, standing perfectly still, arms raised, waving. The analyst leans closer, her breath fogging the screen. A glitch, surely. A trick of the light? Then the footage skips. Answer for a single good churning frame. Every figure is facing the camera. She recoils, knocking over her coffee. The liquid spreads across the desk like blood, dripping onto the floor where... Was that a whisper? Her hand trembles as she shuts the file. Across the room, the ventilation system hums. Or was it laughing? She tells no one what she saw. But the sand knows. The sand always knows. Final transmission. Command, this is Alpha 1. We've found the village. There's something wrong here. The shadows, they're moving. Not human. They're not human. Make it stop. You're next. The file is sealed. The orders are signed. Another patrol deploys at dawn. And in the ruins of Al Nasir, the doll sits upright in the dust. Waiting. Always waiting. The end. Or is it?